God. I think that God is watching us, and I don't know that He's determined everything He's going to do on this thing. I don't know how He gets the foreknowledge of God in there and other things. We don't need that, but we don't need to understand that, but we do know this. God said, if you will do this, then I will do that. Heal your land. Implying, if you don't do this, then I won't do this. That's what He's implying. If you'll call on the name of the Lord, you'll be saved. If you don't, you won't. You have something to do with it. Now, I think that the judgment on our country began in 9/11. Now, you guys are too young to understand it. You weren't there when it happened. But, and I won't forget, when I was sitting there and I saw it on TV, I couldn't believe it. This never happened in America before. And God raised up an enemy through Osama bin Laden, put two planes in the hearts of two of our gods, our military with the Pentagon, our money in the World Trade Center, and our third god is big government, and the plane was headed there. Now, can God raise up an enemy against a nation because of their sin? All right, let's get an answer by looking at verse 24 of chapter 6 in Solomon's prayer. If thy people Israel be put to the worst before the enemy, all right, chapter 6 and verse 24, if thy people Israel be put to the worst before the enemy, why? Because they have what? Sinned against thee. And shall return. That's a revival. Then Solomon basically says, if they will return, will you protect them and deliver them and heal them? Forgive the sin of the people and bring them again into the land. Now, I believe that God raised up an enemy with Osama bin Laden to try to get our attention. And I never will forget, there was a short return to God. I went to Manhattan, passed out a bunch of tracts, and you know what people did? They said, hey, do you have some more of those? Can I have more? How many do you want? I had many of them say, can I have 10 of them? I said, sure. And I gave them to them so they could give them to their friends. And even in Congress, the Senate, they got together and they sang, God bless America. Do you remember seeing them do that on the White House lawn, Capitol building? And it was a short-lived surface turning back to God. But it was short-lived, and then very quickly we turned to the homosexual same-sex marriage agenda. And what's the next thing that God can do? Notice verse 26. He said this. Solomon is praying. When you judge us by raising up an enemy, which, by the way, China and Russia and North Korea, they are rising. We are declining. Iraq, Iran especially. And they can put a hurting to us if God so chooses to use them to do it. And so we've got to have forgiveness or we will get judgment. I have a friend who is working with DeSantis, and I said, how are things going? He said, Mike, I'm not sure we're even going to have America by the time of the election. I do not know what he's talking about, but he is a scared man. And so what I'm saying is, at least we need to take seriously that prayer and confession and getting things right makes a difference with the enemies. Now the second thing, notice verse 26, when the heaven is shut up and there is no rain, why? Because they have sinned. Verse 26. So God will change weather patterns, and I never will forget. They legalized same-sex marriage. I was in California at the time, San Francisco, and 1 week to the day, they broke out into 1,700 wildfires. Coincidence? They always had wildfires, but they had 400 the year before. Now they had 1,700, a 400% increase in 1 year. And I was there when they began to talk about this. Why is this happening? Well, the lady on the news said, well, the reason we've had so many wildfires this year is because for the longest time there's been no rain. Who sends rain? God. And then she said, and all of a sudden, clouds formed everywhere across California. I thought, okay, who forms clouds? And then she made this outstanding statement. She said, and all of a sudden, there was lightning everywhere, but no rain. Lightning everywhere across California, but no rain. You know what that sounds like to me? Old-fashioned fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think God was trying to give a message. I never will forget New Orleans, Katrina. I never will forget that they were talking about their Mardi Gras, and they were saying, leave your Christian friends at home. And in their advertisement, I read it, leave your Christians at home. They said, we're going to celebrate every form of sexuality possible on the floats. And that's all I'll say. Horrible, horrible wickedness. But they weren't able to have that because God stirred the water outside of New Orleans, and He blew Hurricane Katrina right into the heart of New Orleans and wiped it out. And I think God's giving us some messages. And I really do believe that God does these things. And so we are in a situation where we need to either have a revival or we will not see a survival. There's a fellow who was running for president of the United States. He didn't get very far this time, maybe will in the future. He called me up and he said, brother, will you travel with me and preach? I went to one of the places in Florida with him, but he wants to do a One Nation Under God campaign. I don't want to tell you his name, but I will say this. There are people that recognize we need leadership that turns us back to God. But we can't necessarily wait on other people. We want to make sure that we turn back to God. Now, there is so much more, but we're going to celebrate the 4th. But just so you know, everything we believe based on the Bible, am I right? Right? Okay, so what we saw in the Bible in another passage is a place that was very evil, like Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Did God say enough of that nation? Then God can say enough of this one. But also, don't forget in the story that the angels said, we're going to judge this nation. It's going to be judged. And we look at our nation, we say, it's got to be judged. If we don't get judged, he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, this is what people say. But think about this. What did the angel say? Lot said, if we can find 50 righteous people, will you spare it? The city is what it was. But it's a picture of a group of people. What did God say? If I can find 50, I what? I'll spare it. Now, how many people were there? A lot. A lot more than 50. But only 50 would have made a difference. And so then, if only 50 would make a difference then, do you think that 5,000 Christians could make a difference today in America? But then he went down and he said, well, what if I can find, I think the next one was 40, I'll spare it for 40. And then he said, well, I don't want to be presumptuous, but what about if I could get 30 righteous people? You can find 30 righteous people. Will you spare it? I will. And then 20. And then finally he said, just one more time, let me just ask you. If I could find 10 teenagers who really wanted to live for God, or 10 men and women that really did genuinely walk with God, would you spare for 10's sake? And what did God say? I'll spare. But the sad thing is, couldn't find 10 people that were really whatever God is looking for. Okay? So here's the question. As we're talking about revival, I put myself in this question too. Let's say, I'm going to close with this. Let's say that some angels came and they padlock the back door, padlock the windows, lock them so you can't get out, and they make this announcement. God has sent me to say, we're going to destroy the United States if I can't find 10 righteous people in this building. You're the only hope. Or if God were to say, I'm going to destroy Hessel if I can't find 10 righteous people in this building. And so you can't get out, you can't get in, it's up to you guys. Here's the question. Could God find 10 really all out, completely what God wants, genuine, completely selfless heart, at least working that way, Christians in this room? And I guess the proportion would be better to say, could God find 2? Could he find 4? And the question would be, would you be one of them? Would I be one of them? And it's just a good thing for us to think about, where am I right now? And let's just seek the Lord. And remember, he looks on the heart. So even David failed, but God called him a man after God's own heart. So don't think because you sin here or you sin there that God is so done with you. He's not. But make sure your heart is really seeking God, not pretending. Let's bow heads. Now, with our heads bowed and our eyes closed, I do again every time I'm preaching want us to consider to make decisions that are needed. Now, how many of you would say, Brother Mike, I need to have this deeper relationship with God than I presently have, and I know that there's something lacking there, and only God can point it out to you if there's something lacking. Now, you're not bragging. If you don't raise your hand, you're not being self-righteous. You're not a hypocrite. If you don't raise your hand, it might be because you're fully seeking and fully connected with God. Not that you don't want more. But if you would say God is pointing out to you, you have some areas you need to shape up with your seeking God and your connection with God, and you really want to pursue that, would you just before God lift a hand and put it right back down? Good, 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 good. Before God, lift that hand and put it right back down. Good, good, great. Now, how many of you would say already God is pointing out an area where I think I need to change? It could be iniquity. It could be if you're not praying in the mornings or praying throughout the day, it's probably because you think you're doing a pretty good job on your own. It could be this God dependence, God gratitude toward God, but this connection with God, it could be that. But if you would say God's either pointed out some sin already or some other God that you need to get out of your life and make God the God again, would you just lift up a hand if there's a specific sin or a heart issue with God that needs to change? Okay, good, good, great, great, good. And I think it'd be good for us to pray about these things and then go ahead and have a little time of prayer together. So if you want to pray on your knee by your chair, you want to come forward and kneel on the front pew or front steps, we'll give you just a few moments to pray. I personally like to get on a knee and pray. But you go ahead and pray, and then we'll have a short season of prayer for revival together. So if you want to come, if you want to kneel by your chair, whatever you want to do, make a definite move would be good for your heart.